Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 2 Episode 4. It's called Day 1. So spoilers for the episode as always. And this is fascinating to me as someone who's played the games and has been saying ever since I played the second game or ever since they started the TV show and I knew they'd have to adapt the game into this season. I thought, oh, they're going to change the structure because the structure of Last of Us Part 2 doesn't lend itself to TV. But weirdly, so far, this episode kind of implies that they're going to follow the structure of the game, which is we're going to keep following Ellie and then save the other characters for mostly later. I'll just say there. I don't want to spoil anything for people who have not played the game. Unless they start doing things very differently in the next episode or two. But it seems like they're following that structure, and that is surprising. It's ballsy, actually, because I feel like the start of Season 3, when it comes, is going to feel very strange, following mostly different characters, but hey, we're here. As far as this episode's concerned, though, I really like this episode. As far as an adaptation goes, this was delivering the goods in a number of ways. I was constantly feeling, as I was watching this episode, like I was remembering how the game felt in a number of different ways. Something as simple as the opening in them in like an abandoned pharmacy looking for supplies and just casually talking to each other as they're doing so. You do a lot more of that in the game, of course. There's an entire section of going through the city, scavenging like that. Obviously, you're not going to do that much of it. It'd be repetitive in a TV show, but it was really nice to have that little moment at the start. Even something as simple as there being human enemies to deal with at one point when they're in TV station. Like the way they enter the scene feels a lot like the game when you're looking through the station and then you hear the WLF soldiers coming in and bantering with each other. I say bantering, they're on edge because there's serious things happening. And of course Ellie and Dina don't want to be found and certainly don't want to be blamed for what else has happened at the station with the dead bodies of their fellow troops. So yeah, just stuff, the subway scene, the theater scenes at the end, honestly the thing that's really got me about this episode in particular, now it was true in the first few episodes, but the first few episodes it was mostly houses and stuff like that, where it felt like the layout of the sets was exactly like the games, and that was kind of impressive, but they're fairly simplistic things to mimic, right? Maybe the observation deck at the ski lodge was maybe the most impressive of just how it felt like the exact room from the game. But I gotta say, there was multiple locations in this where it felt like they went out of their way. The theater scene, some of the subway stuff, the TV station and how everything was arranged, just the music shop, the layouts of these places were so like the game, in a way that it didn't even need to be. This was an attention to detail that is clearly flowing with love, and of course the person who made the games is involved, so he clearly cares, but it's you didn't need to have the exact same layouts, but it does add something kind of cool to kind of recognize the location if you have played the game. So I thought that was really interesting as well. But obviously things are trimmed out. There's a lot of locations that they go through before they get to the TV station in the game. And that's fine, because it would be repetitive. You have to kind of keep things moving. The pacing has to work. But it was a pretty action-packed episode. There was scenes with, obviously, human enemies, with infected enemies. Very tense, very visually interesting as well, because they're very different places. One of the key differences, actually, it's a really simple thing, but the TV station scene is actually in daytime in the game. But here they have it at night, so it's super dark with just the torches or the flashlights on the various soldiers or with Ellie and Dina as they're sneaking around, lighting things up. Very atmospheric. The red flares in the subways right out of the games. That's exactly how that scene feels. The red, and they did a great callback to the first episode of the season here, where Dina, when they're being quiet because they don't want to be found, Dina starts counting the number of infected she can hear, because they established in the first episode that she's very good at listening for the infected and sort of calling how many are in a building or whatever. And here she's counting on her fingers and she gets to 5 and she's shitting herself, and then there's just more noises and she's like, well, we're beyond counting. I'm out of fingers. But I think that was a really good callback that set up the tension and the suspense of like all of the enemies coming in. It very, very quickly negated the human enemies because obviously they're just getting mauled by the infected. And then the ensuing chase through the train cars and just narrowly getting out, building up to a really big moment for the story, which is Dina finding out that Ellie is immune. Now, this is something that they had to change from the game because the thing that's in the game that informs her has not existed in the show. So in the game, and this is something that's in the first game as well, is the idea of spores that let out a mist, a gas, whatever you want to call it. And they regularly, if they're traveling through these spore-infested areas, they have to put on gas masks to not breathe it in. So in the second game, when Ellie is discovered to be immune by Dina, it's because they're traveling through a spore-related area in the subway tunnels, right? So the same location they're in the episode. But Ellie's mask gets cracked, and Dina goes to take hers off and says, well, share mine. And Ellie quickly jumps at her and says, no, you keep that on. I'm fine. I'm immune. Like, she sort of like... So it plays out very differently, not just because the moment itself is different, but because her getting bit in front of Dina like she does in this episode means that naturally there's a whole sort of section of tension where Dina just thinks that means Ellie's dead and that she's going to have to kill her because that's what happens in this world when someone gets bit. They're infected, you have to put them down. So that added a whole little section there of this tension, and seeing the horror on her face and the fear, and like when she's holding the gun up to Ellie, and Ellie trying to navigate how to like approach this, and like because she's realizing that anything she says to try and convince her not to shoot her is exactly the sort of thing that anyone else would say when they're trying to convince someone not to shoot them when they've been bit, right? It sounds just like she's being desperate and it's not like a true thing. So I think that was a really cool addition because it felt like a natural thing that had to happen that way. But even just in the moment, it's actually a really cool thing to evolve their relationship, is Ellie intentionally throwing her arm in front of Dina's face when she's about to be bit so that her arm gets bit instead. Now, we know, the audience, that Ellie's effectively using her superpower here to protect Dina, but to Dina, this obviously looks like she's just sacrificed herself. And this actually ends up propulsing the love aspect of it, because once some time has passed and Dina's come to accept that she is immune, and she admits she's pregnant here at this point, then that leads to them having sex for the first time. Now, in the game, they actually had sex much earlier. They had sex before Joel was killed. And I think it was a wise choice to keep it, because it meant bigger. It was a bigger deal, what I mean to say, by holding it off till now. And I think the idea that Dina saw Ellie seemingly give her life to save her, but then finding out after thinking that she's going to have to lose her best friend and potential, romantic partner that she's maybe building up the relationship to, she thinks she's lost all that. She says as much in the episode, but like it all plays out there where she thinks she's just lost the person she cares about the most, and then is relieved that through some weird miracle she's actually okay. And no one else she's ever met in this world is just okay when this happens. And it's understandable that rush of feelings leads to this romantic scene. And I think even just like the reaction to her being pregnant, which they tease at the start of the episode, because I mean, I knew when she was looking at something off camera that it was pregnancy tests. It was just knowing where it was going. It was just, and even if you didn't, I feel like it's probably a reasonable guess, because she says she has to pee. Not that Ellie knows that you pee on a pregnancy test. That did get a little chuckle out of me, was her saying, wait, why did you pee on it? It's like, I don't just pee in things. That's how it works. And the same, although this was more sweet than funny, was the pride flag earlier in the episode, where these two see a couple of pride flags and they're going, why is there so many rainbow flags? That was very sweet, given that these characters are in fact part of that community and just don't know what it means. That was incredibly encouraging, I thought. And just kind of charming. But I think the chemistry between these two is arguably better than it is in the games. I think I care more about the relationship on a more emotional level than I did in the games, and I think part of that is the chemistry between them. I think part of that is Isabela Merced's Dina is extremely likable. Not that the Dina in the game wasn't, but the Dina in this is like extremely likable. And I think Ellie's reaction to like, oh, so this pregnant thing, I guess I'm going to be a dad, and I guess Jesse's also having a kid with us. Like, I kind of love that at no point in the thought process of like this morning after conversation about having a kid, that at any point the vibes are destroyed because the subject of the kid comes up and the subject of, well, you're having a kid with Jesse, does that mean I have to kind of just go back to being the best friend? You know, like, do we have to like go through the charade of like, well, you and Jesse have to be the couple because you're the parents? Or I love that Ellie's response is just like, oh, I guess all three of us are going to be parents then because I'm not giving you up, right? She doesn't say that sentence, but that's effectively how it comes across to me, is that no, we're together now regardless of anything. And obviously they're not going to shut Jesse out because Dina even says that Jesse's a good person. Like, she likes him as a person. It's just that that's not, it's not what she's romantically vibing with. She's trying to convince herself she was, but ultimately not the case. So I think all the character stuff here for this relationship and how it builds to this climax is really interesting. What else is interesting in that they set up obviously day 2 at the end and say, hey, they hear over their walkie-talkie, their radio, that there's stuff going on. They see an explosion in the distance, but they hear the name Owen, which they know is one of the group, and they're like, shit, was it Owen? Maybe it wasn't Owen, maybe it was one of the other names. I'm doubting myself now, but they recognize whatever name was said, and like, oh, we have to go find that person because they'll know where Abby is. And we set up kind of what our goal is for the next episode, the next day. So the one thing I will say is that in the game, Dina does not come with. And that's not like a spoiler here for the show, because at the end of this episode, Ellie tries to tell her to stay, and Dina says no. You know, more emotionally that and more intricate, but ultimately no. They hold hands, they stay together, and that's where we end the story on. Now, obviously, I skipped to the back half here. It would be a disservice to not talk about the music shop scene, because it might be the best scene of the episode. And I say that, like, loving a lot of the scenes in this episode, but I think this scene in particular, and this maybe goes into also why I said I think I like the relationship more in this version, is Ellie going for the guitar, right? And obviously all the guitars are all damaged because they've all been, like, war torn, or they've all been, like, subject to the elements for years, decades even at this point. But she finds one in a case, so obviously that one's been much better preserved, and I was so happy. Now, I've not played guitar in a long time, but I played guitar in high school and for a little bit after. And one of my pet peeves in movies and TV shows is that people just find a guitar and start playing it. They never tune it first. Now, I'm terrible at tuning it, which is why it annoys me, actually, is because I always had to go through the effort of, like, finding, because I can't do it by ear. I need to hear some notes to, like, tune it to. So I was so happy that Ellie tuned it first. It made me happy. So, but she starts playing Take On Me, which she also does in the game. They used that song as well in one of the trailers for the first season. And just the performances here, Dina, the way Merced was looking at her throughout this song and getting, like, teared up and clearly falling in love, if she wasn't falling in love already, was just all on the screen. You could see it all in the performances. It was just a beautiful moment. And obviously with this show being what it is, you're like, oh, something dark's going to happen later to make us, feel really bad about all this. But in the moment, it felt really nice and it felt really sweet. And just it was just a great scene, right? It's just a great scene that serves the purpose of what it's there for. And it actually serves more purpose than that, because one of the other subjects that comes up here, of course, is that Joel's the one who taught her how to play guitar. So guitar is something that Joel has given her that is entirely good, right? Because there was discussion last episode from Tommy and the therapist about how, she might have learned a lot of bad things from Joel. Now, the therapist didn't think that was necessarily true because she probably had a lot of bad things in her anyway. But this idea that she learned a lot of Joel's sensibilities, his mantra, how he, dealt with violence and how he treats people. Maybe she got a lot of lessons that are less than ideal from Joel, but the one thing that she got from Joel that seems to be purely good and purely from love is the idea of music and playing the guitar. And in this moment, that thing she got from Joel that came with this sense of love seems to have then, like, impressed someone else that she loves. Like, this love is sort of passed on through to someone else in a really kind of beautiful way. So I really like that scene. I like the scene in the game a lot as well, and it thematically fit in, and there's some stuff that I'll talk about. I'll refer back to it when later things happen as well. But fantastic, right? Also, the TV station scene, super tense, seeing them deal with human enemies that are well armed, because that's a little bit new for the show. Not that there was no human enemies in the first season, but this was a bit more just like the game, where all of a sudden there's a group of like armed soldiers sneaking about, and they're trying, and they don't do this thing where because in the game you naturally end up taking them all on, right? You kill everyone like you're Jason Voorhees. But obviously they're trying to keep this a bit more grounded. It's a TV show, so Ellie only fights one, and we see her use a chokehold, which we know she can do. We've seen her practice that, and she ultimately stabs him in the neck, which again doesn't matter how much bigger he is. Of course he's going down when he gets stabbed in the neck. So enjoyed that, and that led into the subway sequences and whatnot, and all that stuff was pretty great as well. So yeah, as far as like the action stuff goes and the character stuff with the main two, perfect pretty much. Like I really have very little negative to say about any choices they made there. I have very little negative to say about this episode in general, which is really nice, because I was a bit more mixed in some stuff that was in last episode. And I think this neatly leads us into the conversation we have to talk about now, which is the other side of the episode, which is the furthering the intro of the wolf, but also the scars, and in particular Isaac, who is like the leader of the wolf, the WLF. I'm just going to call him the wolf because it's just easier to say. But so the scenes with him, and notably played by Jeffrey Wright, might I add, who's great. But he's always great. He adds a lot of class to anything he's in. His scenes in this episode, unless I am misremembering something, are not from the game. They are heavily fleshing out the character of Isaac here, and I thought both of these additional scenes were very good. The one that opened the episode, which is set in 2018, so after the apocalypse, by quite some margin, he's part of Fedra, and we just hear these other Fedra soldiers just making fun and telling jokes about this other Fedra guy who just killed a vote. They keep saying this vote, so. And you can tell throughout the scene that there's this sort of younger looking guy who clearly is like he's smelling along and he's laughing with them, but he clearly is the young one who doesn't know exactly what they're talking about. He's maybe not used to this yet. And he eventually says, "What's a vote?" Why do you call them that? I think he says. And they basically just laugh it off and say, "We don't know." And it's Jeffrey Wright, who's not been on camera the whole scene, right? He's been hiding behind the camera, basically. And he chimes in and says, "Oh, because the civilians, we took away their vote. And then we started calling them votes to mock them." And the tone just like sinks. And you definitely get the impression that he has a lot of opinions about how things are going and how Fedra acts and what they're doing to people, even though he's part of them. Now, whether or not he's always felt like that, or this is something that's developed slowly over time since the start of the apocalypse and the formation of Fedra, but the way he just goes out brings the young guy out, because he basically decides that this young guy hasn't become one of them yet, so maybe he doesn't deserve the fate that the rest of them are about to get. But the way he just throws in a couple of grenades and shuts the doors is super, super dark. It really just sets up just how much he's willing to do stuff, and him turning to the young guy and saying, "Time to make a choice." And we see him later on in the later scene as one of the guards. And he seems to be quite a devout follower of Isaac and whatever Wolf stands for these days. And then the other scene with him, of course, that I'm referring to is in the present day of the show, where he is torturing what turns out to be one of the Scars, or the Seraphites, as they actually call themselves. Scars is kind of the derogatory term that's been used by the Wolf, because they all have this scar on their face that they give themselves as part of a ritual into the cult. But yeah, this is a very stark scene. It's just Jeffrey Wright at first, and he's talking about the cookware and how he used to dream of having this great pan set, and then it eventually reveals that he's talking to this Scar who's naked against the wall and has clearly already been tortured, and he's demanding to know when the next attack's going to be on Wolf. And I think what this episode really paints a picture of is this idea of just this war that's happening in Seattle between the Wolves and the Scars. I think the last episode kind of made it seem like, oh, the Scars are more innocent and they're being massacred. And the captured man here even says, you kill our children. And Jeffrey Wright says, yeah, because you train them to shoot us. We don't want to. And it kind of just paints up, and it's like, well, how true are either of those statements? It's very interesting. Well, we know that they do kill the kids, so we saw that last episode, but it does make you wonder, how true is that? Like, does he believe that? Are some of the soldiers working for Wolf? Are they like, okay, they're supposed to be following certain codes and rules, but maybe they've just become the Fedra guys from before, where they're too trigger happy, where they enjoy killing who they perceive to be the enemy, like a lot of corrupt law enforcement, it can end up being like, is that how it's went? Is it just become this new form of racism just against this cult group rather than a race? That's kind of like a really interesting idea. But between this scene and then all the bodies hanging up and the arrows in them at the TV station, where the Wolf soldiers clearly think the scars are behind it, I think having that in the same episode as we see this man being tortured really just paints the idea that both sides are doing very horrific things. And it's maybe summed up best when Dina says, what the F is wrong with Seattle? Like, what's going on here? Like, how are we seeing all these horrific... Like, she's only been here 2 days, and she's walked into 2, like, massacre aftermaths. First when the trail with all the Seraphites, and then here again with all the Wolf soldiers that are hanging up with literally their intestines pouring out of them. So, I really like what it's doing here with building this stuff up. Whereas last episode, some of the stuff they added to the show that wasn't in the game, I felt was maybe a little bit padding. One thing, this episode's actually a little bit shorter, so it doesn't feel padded at all. But all the new stuff felt like it was really fleshing like a side of this world out. This idea of this, I don't even know what you call it, a civil war necessarily, but this war between these 2 factions in Seattle and how different they are. And that was the other thing in the scene where he was interrogating the Seraphite, is he says, we're going to win, and the reason why we're going to win is because every day someone from Wolf decides to switch sides and take the oath and like give themselves to our god. That's not the word they use, our prophet. And he says, but no one's ever giving up our side and going back to you. No one leaves us and goes back to you. Once they're on our side, they stay on our side. Also, it seems like Isaac knows who this prophet was and that she was just a person. And he even points out that a lot of the Seraphites do know that it was just a person. It wasn't some mystical god or some supernatural person. It was a woman. It was just a woman. And we even heard that in the last episode with the guy talking to the little girl and explaining who the prophet was. So no, I'm loving the world building here of fleshing this stuff out, because it's kind of alluded to a lot in the games as you hear little bits and pieces. But of course, so much of what you hear in the game is when you're sneaking around as Ellie and some of the Wolf soldiers will be talking to each other, and you get a lot of like intel that way. But because we're not going to do that as much, because it's not a video game and we're not going to be playing out those sections in the same way that we would there, it does make sense to have some different types of scenes that give us some of that information, and in some cases give us more information than the game ever even had, from what I recall. So I loved all that stuff, honestly. I think the stuff they added here was great. I think all the stuff they took from the game, they adapted very well in ways that felt like it was impactful in the show itself. It didn't just feel like it was, referencing for the sake of making everyone who knows the games go, oh, hey, I recognize this and I recognize this. Isn't that great? No, all the scenes served the purpose they're supposed to serve. They were emotionally affecting, and then the sort of bigger changes because of the way the reveal had to happen with Ellie's immunity to Dina. All the changes that came from that felt very natural and felt like they actually propelled the romantic element in a way that was better than the way they did it in the game. So, which is not to say that I think the show is better in the game necessarily. I'm saying that these specific things are better than specifically those bits in the game. Just in the sense that the game naturally is better at doing other things because it is a video game. And the story is written to make use of the fact that it's a video game. There's some things that just can't translate one-to-one. And sometimes those things can actually benefit from a TV show writing style more than a game writing style. And I think we're seeing that in some moments. In some cases, we're just seeing it because we have got great actors doing the parts and things like that. So yeah, hard to fault much here, to be honest. I think this is the best episode of the season so far. Probably episode 1 after that, and then 2, and then 3 is definitely my least favorite of the season. But not that I'm going to rank them after every episode necessarily, but it's just easy just now because there's 4. And sadly, there's only 3 episodes left, which is a bit of a shame because it's going in super fast. We're already over halfway done now, which sucks. Hopefully, season 3 is a quicker turnaround than it was to season 2. But no, I had a great time with this episode, and it felt like I was really getting a treat as someone who likes the games, but also appreciates just good filmmaking and stuff. I know the director of this episode, if I can just find her name here, Kate Herron. I saw people hyping up this one because it was her directing, and to be fair, I think this was very well directed. I thought all the stuff with them sneaking around in the dark with just the flashlights looked great. I thought all that stuff looked wonderful. I didn't recognize the name. Apparently she did a bunch of Loki, which I didn't really like that show, but it wasn't because the directing was bad. It was just, I just didn't think the writing was that good. But, you know... I think she's done some other shows as well. I don't know if I've seen anything she has done before other than Loki. But I definitely think that this episode lived up to the idea of like how much people were hyping her up as a director. So, yeah, I'll keep an eye out for her name in the future. Maybe she'll do more episodes of this. Maybe she'll do some episodes of other stuff. But it's always nice to see some directors in TV land start to sort of like, you know, crop up a little bit, and we start to notice certain names because you can sort of say, hey, it's usually a good episode when they're directing it. So it's always nice to add someone to that list. But that is me. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm looking forward to next week's episode. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. You can like, subscribe, all the usual things help out. And of course, what helps out the most is financial support, whether that's via Patreon, which is the way I recommend. It's definitely got the most. You get all the stuff for the movie channel as well, if you go and support us on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. But you can support via YouTube membership or via YouTube thanks or any of those things. Any support is greatly appreciated. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?